Welcome back to another build video. I'm not sure why she's holding that. Today I'm actually going over the Nightblade, specifically a DPS stamina focused build for the Nightblade. So without wasting any time, let's get right into it. Start with the gear. In my case, I'm actually running New Moon Acolyte. This is a set I've run on numerous builds in the past, both before and after the nerf. I tend to push, you don't require the gold on the armor specifically, but I tend to push it up to gold just so I can get that maximum value on the 5-piece for the weapon and spell damage. This is still a really solid base set, in my opinion, for a lot of builds, even after the nerf. It just makes it, I don't want to say brainless, but essentially it makes it very, very easy to kind of maintain, because there's no gimmick to it. There's no particular thing that you have to do. It's just on all the time. So this is kind of a go-to set for a number of my DPS builds, just because it's just a solid base foundational set. So in this case, we are sporting a jack, guards, and a ring. Ring is optional. Obviously it'd be cheaper. I had this left over from a separate build, so it was already golded out, but it obviously would be a lot cheaper to just do a third piece up here of the armor rather than using a ring, but and then just swap out for your second piece down here for the ring. It's easy enough to do. Second piece, as you've already seen, here is Vicious Ophidian, or Vicious Serpent, rather. This is a trial set, comes from the Craiglorn trials. You can pick it up in any of them. This is considered, I guess, the perfected version of it, but you can get this on normal difficulty on any of the trials as well, because of the way the Craiglorn trials were set up. So it's fairly easy to pick up. This is one of the few builds where I'm actually running a trial set. I realize that that's not always going to be workable for some people. I don't tend to run a lot of trials either. So my suggestions for alternatives, if you don't want to run the trial and you don't have access to this, it's pretty much up to you, honestly. This particular set brings sustain, it brings crit, as well as the boost at the end with the major expedition when you kill things. So it's just a nice overall well-balanced set, and I think it complements New Moon very, very well. So this is what I'm running, but you can replace it with any number of things. I know, trying to think of the past of other sets that I've run that would be comparable, but essentially it's kind of a balance of resource and damage. So any other set in the game, could be medium, it could be light. If you can find a light set that works for you to swap in here, it would work probably just as well. So New Moon and Vicious Serpent, these are all medium pieces. I'm running Divines on the small pieces, Infused on the large, and again I golded out the New Moon just to get the maximum value on that 401 weapon and spell damage. So New Moon Ring, in this case I'm not running any type of monster helm. Typically, I like monster helms, I like incorporating them into my builds, but for this particular build, I wanted to run a mythic, so I knew I'd already be losing one piece, and since trainee brings such a density stat, it's a good one piece to fill in a lot of cases. That's better than running like a one-piece monster, for example. I think trainee is just better overall. So instead of a monster helm, in my case, I'm running a one-piece trainee. Here I have it on the ring, but you can essentially run it anywhere in the build. And then I picked up the Serpent's Coil mythic item for my other piece. So it's New Moon Acolyte, Vicious Ophidian, One Piece Trainee and the Sea Serpent's Coil. The Sea Serpent's Coil actually meshes pretty well with this build. It does have the 40% snare in kind of an exchange for the Major Berserk and Major Courage, but the Major Expedition that you get when killing things from Vicious Ophidian, as well as just Nightblade itself, has class skills and things that you can run, which will help to offset that snare. So this is another reason why I recommend, if you can get a hold of Vicious Ophidian, this is definitely the one set that I would recommend. But if you can't, maybe looking for something else that gives you some additional speed boost or something to kind of combat that snare. Even with the snare, I don't find this terribly bad in terms of holding me back and able to DPS. It actually works quite well. And the Major Berserk and Major Courage are both very, very nice buffs to boost your damage overall. Now, the one thing that I would say with this build is it's pretty much designed for Vet DLC Dungeon and below. This, excuse me, you could run this in a trial setup, but in a lot of cases you're going to be getting these same buffs, the Major Berserk, the Major Courage, from your group already in a trial setup, so this wouldn't be as useful, and at that point you're just snaring yourself with no real benefit to it. So I don't recommend this particular setup, or at least this mythic specifically for trials, just because you're going to have overlap. And in this case I'm running dual daggers. I like Nirnhone and Precise. This is typically what I'll run on my dual wield dagger setups, because it's over the years there's been minor adjustments, but this has maintained a pretty consistent amount of crit plus damage. I'm running a poison damage and a flame damage enchant respectively on each one. Typically I would run like a stam return on the secondary weapon, but because we have the stamina that you get back from Vicious Serpent, combined with our food and whatnot, sustain is not really an issue in this build. So I went with the flame damage just to get those additional dot effects. We are running infused on all the jewelry. I recommend, again, because the sustain is good enough in this build, you can easily get away with running infused, which then boosts your weapon damage all the higher. So they're all running infused with weapon damage enchants. And in my case, these are all considered gold level, so you're getting the maximum out of that as well. But purple works just fine as well. It'll be just slightly less on the damage, but... Back bar is the Maelstrom bow. If you have the perfected version, go for it. I don't. I tend to stick with kind of it's easier runs as far as getting this, and I haven't actually pursued Vet all that much on Maelstrom. And the one piece bonus that you gain from the Maelstrom bow specifically, because you're not on your back bar long enough for it to really be all that beneficial, you're not really missing out on anything, so the normal version of this is just fine. I'm running infused with the Berserker enchant, which gives you that weapon damage boost of the 452. This will be based on your skills. This should have 100% uptime, which means, again, you've got that much more weapon and spell damage overall. So the build pulls in, it's a really, really well balanced, in my opinion, combination of nice high damage, decent amount of crit, and very good resource sustain as well. Even with the 5% additional cost that you're getting from New Moon, that's easily offset. Obviously, I mean, you can look at the stats here just logically, and it's 8% reduced cost. So these two in combination means that technically you're not losing anything. In fact, you're gaining a little bit, as far as it's giving you 3% cost reduction versus 5% cost increase. So again, highly recommend these two in combination. It's going to give you a really good balance. So that is the gear. Again, either one of these sets, I mean, this is just the build is kind of a compilation of everything put together, so I find that these work well together. You can technically swap out New Moon if you want, if you don't want the additional cost and you really want to maximize your resources, or, you know, vice versa. You can swap out Vicious Ophidian if you're not running a trial. You can run any number of other sets. I would suggest trying to find something that offers some sustain as well as damage to kind of get something that mimics the behavior of this. So going into skills, this is a dual bar setup. So on our front bar, we're running Camouflaged Hunter. Being a Nightblade, this kind of sticks with the theme, and it's going to give you the additional, you're going to gain Major Savagery and Prophecy. Prophecy is not terribly useful in our case, it just kind of comes as part of the package, but you're gaining the extra crit there for your stamina. You're gaining Minor Berserk as well. This comes from the Fighters Guild skill line. It's the third one here, and we take the Camouflaged because this kind of, again, fits with the theme of stealth and Nightblade. And Fighters Guild abilities, in case you don't know, you have passives in here. Just for having them slotted, you're gaining additional weapon spell damage. Again, that's further boosting all of those weapon damage buffs that we're getting just from having it slotted. So we're not gonna cast this. It does have an additional mechanism that will expose stealth enemies. That's essentially just for PvP. So this never gets touched. It just sits on the bar and does what it needs to do just by default passively. Attacking from the flank, you're gaining that Minor Berserk. So this is an additional way, and we'll get into the CP later. We've got some benefits that actually will boost the damage that we get from flanking. Our second skill, notably this gives Empower. It also gives Minor Berserk, so there's a little overlap between these two skills. This is a flex spot. Completely up to you as far as what you want to put in here. I like the Gap Close. It's kind of a fun factor for me, as well as this is actually a decent skill to use, and there are instances in dungeons where you're likely going to need to Gap Close. Not a requirement per se, but it'll make it easier to get to mobs or monsters or just generally moving back and forth. So I like this skill. And this comes from our class skill line, the Assassination skill line. And again, we have passives that we gain through here. I recommend taking all the class passives, by the way, but just from having things slotted in here, we have pressure points, increase weapon and spell crit ratings for each assassination ability slotted. So this is a benefit that we get from pulling anything from here. And you'll notice we actually have 3 on our front bar. So the benefit that we're getting from this is currently 13, 14. So this is, again, boosting our crit for that kind of well-balanced and high damage output. Our main spammable is Surprise Attack. That actually comes from the Shadow skill line. It's the first skill you unlock. We take the Surprise Attack Morph because it's stamina. And normally for a dual wield setup, I would actually be running Flurry, either Bloodthirst or Rapid Strikes, but the Nightblade actually does have a very decent spammable, excuse me, that works quite well in their kit, and so I'm actually running this in this case. It's also more convenient for me due to the not so recent changes that they made to the flurry animation and how it works. Just a personal opinion, but I think unfortunately this used to be one of my favorite skills to use, and after they changed the animation, I don't particularly care for this skill anymore. The animation and the sound, the way it lines up, it's terrible to use. I'm not saying to say it doesn't do damage, but it doesn't work nearly as well as it used to with the feedback that it provides. So I actually can't stand using this skill anymore, and I wish they'd change it back. But that's a separate topic, separate discussion. So for now, we're going to go with Surprise Attack, and this actually works quite well. It comes from the Shadow skill line, like I said. And I believe... yeah, so we have an ability slotted bonus here as well under the Shadow skill line, where you're getting max health increase for each shadow skill that you have slotted. So in this case, we have 1, so we're gaining a 3% bonus to our max health, which obviously helps with our survivability, so that's a nice bonus. Our 4th skill comes from the assassination skill line again. This is Killer's Blade. It's the stamina morph. This is your execution ability. And again, the Nightblade actually is one of my favorite classes in the sense that it brings a lot to the table in its class abilities. It's obviously gone through a lot of changes over the years, but it's still, I think, one of the best classes in terms of bringing a lot into the class skill lines. Some of the other ones are kind of lacking, in my opinion. So Nightblade is gives you the benefit of, I can actually utilize a lot of my class skills, which helps to retain that class identity, which is nice. So this is a great ability. This is going to be your built-in execute. And of course, being an assassination skill, it's giving you that further, this is helping to boost the pressure points value. Our last skill comes from the siphoning skill line. It's the last thing you unlock. It's power extraction. This has been debated, I know, a lot over the years, but it's also been slightly buffed over the course of time. And it's actually, in my opinion, I even liked it back in the beginning. I thought it was a decent skill, but it was outshined back then by some other skills from like the dual wield skill line. But I think this is actually quite powerful and very useful. So essentially, we have our spammable, but this is single target. This not only is going to give us our major brutality, as well as minor courage, but this is really, really great for your AoE. So when you're hitting those mobs, this is generally what you're going to end up spamming to be able to take out the mobs. And siphoning, it's not for each ability slotted, but while any ability is slotted from a siphoning, you're going to gain more magicka. Now, we are a stamina build, but we are using our magicka pool for some skills, so this is actually a nice little side benefit that we get from having an ability from the siphoning skill line slotted. Our ultimate on the front bar comes from the assassination skill line. This is incapacitating strike. Actually, both of these morphs are viable, even though it's a kind of a stamina focused build. So completely up to you whether you want to go for the ulti gain versus the reeve or what have you. I like Incap just because it's a stamina build, and I'm kind of building with that traditional mindset that this is what goes with stamina builds. But very, very solid, single target, and of course you get, again, it's boosting the pressure points value. So that's our front bar. Our back bar, which is the bow again, starting with leeching strikes. That comes from the siphoning skill line. So again, we're going to gain that small magicka boost, the 8% on the back bar, because this is slotted. This helps our sustain. It complements the Vicious Ophidian set as far as the overall resource sustain. So this is just a nice skill to have on the back. Secondary here is Arrow Barrage. This comes from our bow skill line. It's the second skill. Arrow Barrage overall will do more damage, but it's a shorter uptime. So if you're one of those people that has more difficulty doing the bar swapping, I'd suggest going for Endless Hail because it's got a longer uptime with the 15 seconds. I like kind of the bar swap mechanic, being able to bar swap cancel and move back and forth. So for me, I take Arrow Barrage because overall you're going to end up getting more damage from this morph. Having this up 100% of the time, if you keep this up, this is what will end up triggering your Berserker enchant on the bow, which gives you that 100% uptime on the weapon damage increase of 452 because of the infused trait specifically. So you definitely want infused in order to get that 100% uptime. So this is a skill you're going to want to keep up, and the damage output from this, even though it looks like, you know, tiny pew-pews, it's actually a very solid boost to your damage overall. Our middle here is Twisting Path. This comes from the class skill line, from the shadow line. So on our back bar, this is actually going to give us that 3% boost to health. So that way when we're flipping back and forth between the front bar and the back bar, you're not going to see any dips in the health or any adjustments, because this is going to give us that being a shadow ability. This also helps to complement our damage on the back, and it's giving us Major Expedition, which helps complement. Vicious Ophidian will give you Major Expedition for 8 seconds after you kill something. So in between times, this is also helping to offset and give you that boost in speed, which helps to offset the snare that might be occurring from the Serpent's Coil Mythic. Plus it's a Magicka skill, so this helps to kind of balance out the resource management. I like usually, if I can, trying to work in 1 or 2 Magicka skills, because we do have that Magicka pool, so why not pull from it? Our 4th skill here is Razor Caltrops. This comes from the Alliance skill line. So I believe this is a level 6 assault and support to unlock this. If you're not a PvPer, my recommendation would be to go run Battlegrounds. I want to say it took a couple hours. If you're doing it during a double AP event, even less, in order to unlock this. I do recommend this. However, in the event that you don't have access to this and you don't want a PvP, the main reason that we're using this is for the AoE Major Breach. Major Breach is going to greatly increase your damage. So if you're trying to access Major Breach specifically, you can swap this out in the Assassination skill line with Mark Target. You want to take the Reaper's Mark morph. The Piercing Mark is more of the PvP focused morph, and this will give you access to Major Breach as well. In the event that you're running dungeons and you've got an official tank who is actually taunting, or in any other way applying Major Breach, then you can swap this out. This is a flex spot. You can swap this out for any number of other things. Potentially you could run Trap Beast, taking the Barb Trap morph. This is a nice thing that will have a good uptime, so you can set that on the ground and it'll help boost your damage. Plus, being another Fighters Guild skill line, at least while you're on the back bar, that's going to boost your weapon damage. But this is kind of a flex spot in the event that you're running dungeons with someone that has access to Major Breach. So feel free to swap out for whatever you want to run. Last one on this one is Resolving Vigor. This again comes from the Alliance Skill War. It's now the first skill you unlock. Even if you don't want a PvP, my recommendation is to go over, once you're level 10 or higher, go over to Cyrodiil and run yourself through the training. There should be some sort of a person, depending on your faction, that will meet you near the door, somewhere near the beginning portion, and offer you training. Take up the quest and just follow that all the way through to the end, to completion, which should put you at a level 3, which will unlock this. So you don't technically have to do any PvP. All you have to do is go through the training. It never takes you outside the base camp, and that will unlock this. This is our main primary heal. We want the Resolving Vigor morph, which is shorter, but this overall will do a better job of healing you. And for our ultimate on the back bar, I'm currently running Dawnbreaker. This is a newly leveled character, so I'm still leveling some of this. I don't even have this to morph. You would generally want to take the Flawless Dawnbreaker morph back here, because this is going to give you additional weapon and spell damage, 300 boost for 20 seconds. So in the event that you were just going for, I want to boost my damage for a 20-second duration, rather than casting the in-cap, you can cast this on the back bar, flip back to your front bar, and now you've got the additional weapon and spell damage for 20 seconds where you can do whatever you need to do. This also, at least from the back bar perspective, it's going to boost our weapon damage back here, but that obviously depends on how long you're back here, which generally speaking, this is more of a buff bar, but it does have that benefit. If you wanted to swap these two out, you could technically move this to the front bar and then swap in cap back to the back. So you would lose a little bit of crit on the front bar, but since this is your main damage bar, bringing this to the front would result in you're going to get 3% more weapon damage on the front bar. So it's kind of up to you as far as where you want to put it. I tend to put it on the back bar just because it has that carryover effect from Flawless, where you can cast it and then flip back to the front and still maintain full damage, which then of course is going to boost the damage of in-cap should you use it during that 20 seconds. So completely up to you as to how you want to work that. So I think that covers the skills. As far as passives, generally speaking, you want to take all your class passives, get all these skill lines unlocked. From the Nightblade perspective, there's not much in here that isn't going to be useful in one form or another. Some classes obviously have some passives that don't really apply in some cases, but for this build, pretty much everything in here is going to benefit you. So get all your class passives. We are running dual wield and bow, so you want to definitely get all of your passives underneath these two weapons unlocked. Armor-wise, in our case, we're running all medium armor. If you do end up swapping out one or both of the sets for something different, then obviously take that into account. If you're running one piece of heavy, one piece light, that type of thing, then you'd want to take these passives. The only medium armor passive that I would say you potentially wouldn't need for general PvE content would be the improved sneak. All the rest of these are beneficial. So in our guilds, the Fighters Guild, because you are running multiple Fighters Guild abilities, I would recommend taking these 4 passives when you can unlock them. We don't have anything underneath Mages Guild. Undaunted, I always recommend taking both Undaunted Command, Undaunted Metal. These are going to help you if you're running dungeon content, always. We're all in medium armor, so in this case we're only getting a 2% bonus, but that's still 2% bonus to your health, stamina, and magicka, which is always going to be helpful. And of course, if you do swap out the sets with different armor types, then this is going to go up depending on medium, light, heavy quantities that you're running. Alliance War, there's nothing really here other than the continuous attack, giving you the major gallop that just helps you get around more quickly. I do recommend unlocking that, but there's nothing required here for either of these. Racial passives, obviously you want all of your racial passives. In our case, we're a Dark Elf. I think Dark Elf is a good choice for this. I chose it because Dark Elf gives you the additional weapon and spell damage, further boosting the damage output. Thematically, I like Dark Elf. It seems to fit with Nightblade, and plus you're gaining max magicka and stamina, which is always going to be useful. No health boost, but I think that's really not an issue in terms of survivability. This is actually a very well balanced survivable build. So, but the race really doesn't matter. Honestly, you can literally swap this out with whatever you want to run. So, I just went with Dark Elf for the previous reasons. Under crafting, alchemy, medicinal use, this is pretty much the only thing that I would recommend if you're running dungeons, especially the harder content, because this is going to allow you to take advantage of your potions, to have full uptime on your potions. So I highly, highly recommend leveling alchemy. There are numerous guides online at this point about going through poisons rather than potions to kind of help save your resources in order to get this leveled, but this is well worth it because it's going to give you that 47 seconds or whatever it is of full uptime when you do use a potion. I don't tend to be a potion chugger. That's not my playstyle. I know top end players are just basically back-to-back potions. So in either case, it's going to maximize the potion capabilities. So highly recommend. None of the other ones in here are critical to the build at all. So And that should cover passives. CP, green tree is completely up to you. It is a Nightblade, so there are Nightblade specific kind of fun passives or active things that you can take in here. So green tree's completely up to you as to what you want to focus on. Because this is a dungeon spec, I tend to focus on things like Treasure Hunter and Rationer. These have worked well for me. We are running food, so this is beneficial. I like the additional speed out of combat when I'm moving around, so I like taking this, but this area is really completely up to you. On the blue tree, I went for kind of a balanced setup with the Nightblade, where we've got kind of a combination of AoE and direct damage. So in my case, my active selections were Biting Aura, Master at Arms, Thaumaturge, and I went with Backstabber in this case because this goes to that whole flanking, positioning yourself at the sides or the back of the enemy, whatever you're attacking. This actually does help a lot with the damage output, but if you're someone whose playstyle doesn't necessarily fit to this, my recommendation would maybe to swap that out for fighting Finesse, because you do have decent crit coming into this as a Nightblade with the sets that we're running, so this is a good alternative. The rest of these, I'm taking Piercing and basically following the stamina tree down here, which allows us to get those status effects, as well as Mighty. You can follow this tree if you have a bunch of points. I'm just kind of putting points in as I get extra points. I've got a few extra here, but I'm just kind of looking for logical places to place points. Because we're running flame damage, you could potentially put something into here to increase the chances of getting that to activate. So, but outside of the main four, it's kind of up to you. This I need to take just to get things unlocked to get over here, but this is further boosting our crit, and then everything else is kind of at your option. Red tree, because we are a Dark Elf and a Nightblade, I generally take the health because that helps to kind of make us a little more survivable, and I put the points into health here as well. It's not a lot, but every little bit helps. I'm back to taking Rejuvenation, even though it's a lower amount of recovery. This is a consistent kind of fixed amount, so I generally take that. If you're feeling very comfortable with your resources, you could potentially swap this out for something else. Maybe you want to increase your armor, something along those lines. So this is a little flexible. Again, for resource sustain, I like Survival Instincts. As you're going through harder content, there's going to be numerous times where you're afflicted with a status effect. So during that time, this will help reduce the cost of your skills. So I like that. Bloody Renewal, if you're running a stamina DPS build, this is generally the recommended one to take. If you're running a Magicka DPS, then this would be the corresponding version of it in Magicka. So I take this because, again, it just helps with the sustain. You're going to be, as a DPS, you're going to be killing a lot of enemies, so this is it's a good way to get your stamina back. And then leftover points, as you can, reduce the cost of Break Free and Roll Dodge. These are kind of my top two priorities for cost reduction. It's not a huge amount, but every little bit helps, and these are both things that you're going to be doing a lot in dungeons, especially if you get to the harder and harder content. Sprint's less important, but again, if you have extra points, this is another area where you can put points. Block cost reduction, and then the amount of damage I can block. So okay, so that covers CP. As far as general stats, all points into stamina. You can see from our pools here, we're we're perfectly fine. 20,000. If you do feel a little bit squishier, we can, I'll get to the food here in a second, but you can swap out the food for one that gives you more health. That's up to you. I don't find with the mobility and the damage output with this, I don't find that survivability is an issue, but that's at your comfort level. 31,000 stamina is also more than enough, especially with all of the resource sustained benefits that we're gaining from our various skills and armor. Resistances, again, not super critical. I mean, they're not super high, obviously, but we're a Nightblade. We're sneaky. So, right now our weapon crit is sitting at just under 50%, and just base weapon damage is sitting at 5378. That's completely unbuffed by anything. So, you're going to be looking at really good sustain, really good damage once this is fully buffed and you're actively using it. Stam recovery right now is 1569. Again, it's more than enough with all of the sets and everything combined to keep you going. And because of that, I'm not running the Serpent on this build, I'm actually running the Lover. So that increased pen is going to further boost your damage. This will work for both the Magicka and the stamina based skills, so it's kind of dually beneficial. And in our case, we're running Lava Foot, Soup, and Salt Rice. This is just kind of my go-to for most of my builds. I like the fact that it brings a lot of recovery as well as a nice chunk of stamina with it, so it kind of helps to flesh out the build. If you want to swap it out for something that has more health, you can easily swap this out for something that maybe has a little bit sustain if you're good on resources, or something that has a little more health. Maybe you could do like health and stamina, or health, stamina, and stam recovery in smaller quantities. This, the vampire is just a leftover. The vampire is not required for this build, and in fact, you might even be a detriment. This is just left over from me leveling. When I level a new character, I always unlock vampire and level it as I go, because it's an XP based leveling system. So this is just a leftover. I just haven't removed it. So I think that's basically it. It's a fun build to play. Very, very active. Again, when you've got things like gap closers and speed, and it just everything kind of fits into that Nightblade theme of DPS and get in, get out, and, murder everything. So overall, I've had a lot of fun with this build. The Serpent's Coil, this is the first time I've run this as well. Very happy with that. For both solo content as well as dungeon content. And of course, Vicious Ophidian, if you can get a hold of this, highly, highly recommend it. Fun set to run. Just that speed boost that you get at the end after taking something out just makes the gameplay that much quicker and that much more fun for me. So, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Happy to answer any questions you have about the build. But otherwise, hope you have fun with it, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.